Excessive self-regard tendency. We all commonly observe the excessive self-regard of man. He mostly misappraises himself on the high side, like the 90% of Swedish drivers who judge themselves to be above average. Such misappraisals also apply to a person's major possessions. One spouse usually overappraises the other spouse, and a man's children are likewise appraised higher by him than they are likely to be in a more objective view. Even a man's minor possessions tend to be overappraised. Typewriters. Once owned, they suddenly become worth more to him than he would pay if they were offered for sale to him and he didn't already own them. There is a name in psychology for this overappraise your own possessions phenomenon: the endowment effect. All man's decisions are suddenly regarded by him as better than would have been the case just before he made them. Man's excess self-regard typically makes him strongly prefer people like himself. Psychology professors have had much fun demonstrating this effect in lost wallet experiments. Their experiments all show that the finder of a lost wallet containing identity clues will be most likely to return the wallet when the owner most closely resembles the finder. Given this quality and psychological nature, cliquish groups of similar persons will always be a very influential part of human culture, even after we wisely try to dampen the worst effects. Some of the worst consequences in modern life come when dysfunctional groups of cliquish persons dominated by excessive self-regard tendency select as new members of their organizations persons who are very much like themselves. Thus, if the English department at an elite university becomes mentally dysfunctional, or the sales department of a brokerage firm slips into routine fraud, the problem will have a natural tendency to get worse and be quite resistant to change for the better. So also with a police department, or prison guard unit, or political group gone sour, and countless other places mired in evil and folly, such as the worst of our big city teachers' unions that harm our children by preventing the discharge of ineffective teachers. Therefore, some of the most useful members of our civilization are those who are willing to clean house when they find a mess under their ambit of control. Well, naturally, all forms of excess self-regard cause much error. How could it be otherwise? Let us consider some foolish gambling decisions. In lotteries, the play is much lower when numbers are distributed randomly than when the player picks his own number. This is quite irrational. The odds are almost exactly the same and much against the player. Because state lotteries take advantage of man's irrational love of self-picked numbers, modern man buys more lottery tickets than he otherwise would have, with each purchase foolish. Intensify man's love of his own conclusions by adding the possessory wallop from the endowment effect, and you will find that a man who has already bought a pork belly future on a commodity exchange now foolishly believes even more strongly than before in the merits of his speculative bet. And foolish sports betting by people who love sports and think they know a lot about the relative merits of teams is a lot more addictive than racetrack betting, partly because of man's automatic overappraisal of his own complicated conclusions. Also, extremely counterproductive is man's tendency to bet, time after time, in games of skill, like golf or poker, against people who are obviously much better players. Excessive self-regard tendency diminishes the foolish bettor's accuracy in appraising his relative degree of talent. More counterproductive yet are man's appraisals typically excessive of the quality of the future service he is to provide his business. His overappraisal of these prospective contributions will frequently cause disaster. Excesses of self-regard often cause bad hiring decisions because employers grossly overappraise the worth of their own conclusions that rely on impressions in face-to-face contact. The correct antidote to this sort of folly is to underweigh face-to-face impressions and overweigh the applicant's past record. I once chose exactly this course of action when I served as chairman of an academic search committee. I convinced fellow committee members to stop all further interviews and simply appoint a person whose achievement record was much better than that of any other applicant. And when it was suggested to me that I wasn't giving academic due process, I replied that I was the one being true to academic values because I was using academic research showing the poor predictive value of impressions from face-to-face interviews. Because man is likely to be over-influenced by face-to-face impressions that, by definition, involve his active participation, a job candidate who is a marvelous presenter often causes great danger under modern executive search practice. In my opinion, Hewlett-Packard faced just such a danger when it interviewed the articulate, dynamic Carly Fiorina in its search for a new CEO. I believe that, number one, Hewlett-Packard made a bad decision when it chose Ms. Fiorina, and two, this bad decision would not have been made if Hewlett-Packard had taken the methodical precautions it would have taken if it knew more psychology. There's a famous passage somewhere in Tolstoy that illuminates the power of excessive self-regard tendency. According to Tolstoy, the worst criminals don't appraise themselves as all that bad. They come to believe either that, one, they didn't commit their crimes, or two, considering the pressures and disadvantages of their lives, it is understandable and forgivable that they behaved as they did and became what they became. The second half of the Tolstoy effect, wherein the man makes excuses for his fixable poor performance instead of providing the fix, is enormously important. Because the majority of mankind will try to get along by making way too many unreasonable excuses for fixable poor performance. It is very important to have personal and institutional antidotes limiting the ravages of such folly. On the personal level, a man should try to face the two simple facts. Number one, fixable but unfixed bad performance is bad character and tends to create more of itself, causing more damage to the excuse giver with each tolerated instance. And number two, in demanding places like athletic teams and General Electric, you are almost sure to be discarded in due course if you keep giving excuses instead of behaving as you should. The main institutional antidotes to this part of the Tolstoy effect are, number one, a fair, meritocratic, demanding culture, plus personnel handling methods that build up morale, and number two, severance of the worst offenders. Of course, when you can't sever, as in the case of your own child, you must try to fix the child as best you can. I once heard of a child teaching method so effective that the child remembered the learning experience over 50 years later. The child later became the dean of USC School of Music, and then related to me what his father said when he saw his child taking candy from the stock of his employer with the excuse that he intended to replace it later. The father said, "Son, it would be better for you to simply take all you want and call yourself a thief every time you do it." The best antidote to folly from an excess of self-regard is to force yourself to be more objective when you are thinking about yourself, your family and friends, your property, and the value of your past and future activity. This isn't easy to do well and won't work perfectly, but it will work much better than simply letting psychological nature take its normal course. So that is an excerpt page 322 to 324 of Poor Charlie's Almanack. Charlie Munger, the successful investor, philosopher, writer, and vice president of Berkshire Hathaway. His thoughts are aggregated in this book by Peter D. Kaufman, and these concepts are discussed extensively by the guest on today's podcast. Mr. J is a financial advisor, a certified public accountant, who has made a lot of these mistakes himself and has learned from them, and he teaches his audience optimal personal financial management. He's also available for personal coaching. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. JJ to the 3 Deeper Cuts podcast, your lifestyle magazine for the practicing physician, for the working pathologist deep in the foggy trenches of medicine, who wishes to better manage their personal finances. So take it from somebody who does it, who helps people with their finances all day, every day, and is a licensed accountant. Let's get into it. You post a lot of useful information for the working physician. That's who the main audience of this podcast is, and also other healthcare workers and young professionals. And I like how the things that you write about, you really hammer on the basics of financial discipline. And so thanks for that. So what made you decide to go into the financial services industry to begin with?
So for me, I think if I just start, I started doing my CPA right after school, basically. So even during my school days, I was strong on the accounting side or the math type subjects. So that is what leaned me into heading into this direction. Although when I started, I was a bit involved with the audit, and in case you don't know, but when you are to become a CPA, you have to go through that cycle. And the audit portion of the job was something I did not particularly enjoy. So I think pretty soon, when I was still doing my education as well as getting work experience, started slowly transitioning out of that audit field. So,
Could you describe that a little bit more? What is the audit field? I've heard about this, but
have an idea. So audit, there are two types of audit the companies typically have. They have internal audit and external audit. Internal audit is something that they typically do to make sure their controls and processes are aligned, and there's very little room for errors or gaps in their policies and procedures. External audit is done more for the satisfaction for SCCP, the regulators, so that they can. Perfect. Yeah, so external audit, those are required for SCCP or regulatory requirements. In that field, then typically they would employ, have you heard of PwC, KPMG?
Yep, the Big Four. Yep.
Yeah, the Big Four. So they would typically employ them to do their audit, which then satisfies the regulations that their accounts are solid. There is no misstatement or material, as they use that word a lot, material misstatement in the accounts.
Okay.
So that is a very popular field for CPAs to get into. The other field that a lot of my CPA folks have also gotten into is taxes.
Okay.
So one thing is going through the education process, but when it comes to real life, those are the two fields I was like, okay, I need to step away from this. This is not my thing.
Okay.
So I started slowly moving away, and on the finance side, there is another field which is very popular. It's gaining more popularity nowadays than when I graduated. It's called FP&A, which is financial planning and analysis.
Okay.
And along those lines, there are also, if you want to get more into personal planning, there is the certified financial planners that put their financial plans together for people and work in those forms. So that's how I went through. I went through first the FP&A side, which is the financial planning side. Mostly companies or that work in different industries have those functions within their finance team. And once I was going through that, I started developing more interest in the financial planning side of people, because I started noticing there is a lot of gap in people's knowledge. And I think I'll go off track of your question here, but
No, that's fine.
think
This
it's
is very
kind of-
interesting.
yeah, this is all related. I started noticing a lot of people do not have the basic understanding of finances and how to take care of their budgets and make sure that their finances are in good shape. They're not overspending, those sorts of things. So that's what led me to exploring this field and got me to my online journey as well.
Nice. Do you think there was some advantage to your prior experience in auditing to what you do now?
I think it helps. It definitely helps. Because by going through the audit process, you start to question a lot of things. So you don't take things as they're given to you. Oh, this fund is the highest performing fund for the last year. You start to question that information. I'm just using a basic example so that people can relate to it easily. So you start to question, why was it? Will it still perform for the next 10 years? Will it still be the highest performing? You start to question the underlying causes of what drove those results. Likewise, just in real life, I think whenever you're going through any big purchase or any contract stuff, you would typically be more careful in checking everything and making sure everything is correct.
Okay. So in your day-to-day practice, on your timeline, some of the stuff you write about is never breaking the cycle of compounding as an individual, just working person, saving for retirement. And from your June 23rd post, a $10,000 initial investment plus a $1,000 annually at 10% yield puts you at $139,000. So by waiting, that's how much an investor would lose. So in your day-to-day practice, what are the common reasons that you see why people break that cycle of compounding?
I think one of the major reasons is people start spending what they were investing. With inflation and everything, things have been becoming tougher for people out there. So we started to see that trend a lot. The other reason why people dip into their investment account is if they're preparing for a wedding. If people go out there and now splash, I think easily $50K on a wedding,
Wow.
that takes a big chunk out of your investments and savings. Or sometimes I also see people trying to buy a house when they haven't fully saved up for it. Investment, yes, you are saving for buying a house, but do you necessarily want to break it all for just the house? That is a common mistake people make that I see.
Eventually, you have to have this difficult conversation and call them out on this mistake. How does that usually go?
Mostly people, they would point out to life is to enjoy, and if we are not creating memories and all of that stuff. But I got to keep them aligned to what their goals and objectives were. If we have a financial plan, yes, we can build a marriage in, or if you want to splash a lot on your wedding, then that can be built into the plan. As long as you're sticking to it, I think you will be fine. And I understand people want to create memories and all of that.
The billionaire Anant Ambani wedding.
Yes.
You can't... You think people try to one-up each other on their weddings?
They do that, yeah. People they want to show off. Some people like to show off their wealth more than others. Like the Ambani family. I don't know how much they spent. I think I heard something like probably in Indian rupees, 5,000 crores or something.
Wow.
So that's a lot of money. I understand where it was spent because they invited all these celebrities
Bieber.
from all over the world. Yeah. So it's no surprise to what they have, how much people can go in and spend. So it's not just the event now, right? You got to factor in the dresses, the kind of pre-wedding, honeymoon after. So it adds up to be a lot. And you can build all of that in a plan. but just don't do it at a surprise in a 6 months notice with no plan.
Absolutely. So there's this pattern that we see with any sort of behavior change, including in financial planning, but also in medicine, in my industry, is that people don't change unless they feel pain. Whether it's, you need to lose weight, you need to be compliant with your blood pressure medicines, or you need to stop smoking. Until they really are hurting, like they have some health scare, they just don't listen. Because it's the way the human brain is wired. So when you're in a conversation with a young, 28-year-old, 20-something, and they just got promoted, now they're making $150K a year, and compared to what they were 5 years ago, that seems like a lot. So how do you project the future onto them to make it real for them, or is that even possible? What do you say to them in conversation?
So one of the common mistakes that starts happening, especially if you jump for a fresh graduate making 40, 50K to going up to 100K, the lifestyle creep starts to play its part. People would start then, they were driving their still used cars from their graduation to now trying to buy a BMW all of a sudden. That typically puts you at a big disadvantage. So what I try to do is show to them, and I think I've posted about this as well probably at an earlier time, that the difference of you going and buying that dream car of yours has a lot of cost to it. It's not just the initial cost of the car, but if you're getting it out on lease, you have to factor in all of the lease expenses, plus you're buying an expensive car, it also comes in with their higher maintenance cost. So that all adds up, plus there is a huge opportunity cost to it. And the opportunity cost is what I then try to show to them and try to help them explain that concept of not, if your lifestyle is, your earning potential is increasing, please don't increase your lifestyle to match that. What ideally you want to do is you want to increase your investments. You want to increase what you are saving and investing. Once you are on that path.
Overspending, you have to factor in the extra costs that are often not talked about when you're getting that dopamine buzz from buying something new. I had another question for you. Do you think the doom spending is worse in the modern dopamine culture? The 20-something office worker waking up and scrolling TikTok for an hour. Do they, in your experience, tend to be more impulsive than someone from a prior generation who didn't have access to constant social media? And do you think the digital lifestyle makes it easier to doom spend?
Perfect. So yeah, as I was mentioning, we need to look at the total cost of buying the car. It's not just the initial lease fees or what your upfront payment is. You have to factor in a lot of those things to make sure that you're not overspending. And yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot. So here's an idea. Let me just float this for you. You give me your feedback as somebody who works and deals with this every day. So I noticed this pattern, like when I was in training as residency and fellowship. It was too easy to spend. So if there was something that I knew was emotional spending or something I didn't need, I would just write about it. Would get home at night and I would just write it. Why am I thinking about this? Why is this on my mind? Why do I feel that I need this? At the time, it was like an air purifier that I couldn't afford. It was like a really nice air purifier for my house. And so I just talked myself out of it. I just delayed it. I just said, okay, let me revisit this in a month. And if I still want it, then maybe we can think about it. So do any of your clients do something like that? Or do you do something like that? Or how do you manage this dopamine spending, emotional novelty spending?
That is a trend that we have been seeing over the last decade pretty much or so. The newer generation is definitely not on the saving path compared to the older generation. And they are more on the spending path and trying to enjoy their moments right now and spending more on travel, spending more shopping from Amazon or from their favorite brands, or as we famously A lot of my fellow creators also post about it. Keeping up with the Jonases. That has definitely taken a lot of influence from social media, and they do get that. You could see that they get that dopamine from shopping it. It's so easy now, right? You can shop sitting from your couch. No need to drive, go to a mall, look up for prices and all of that stuff. A lot of people who are smart can actually add in a add-on in Chrome or the web browser that you use and easily find the best deal or price on what they want to buy. So it has definitely helped that spending trend. Way too much, I think.
So what you need to do is get on a Carvana and load up your shopping cart with 5 nice cars and just leave it there. Go take a hike, put it on the back burner, revisit in a month.
So this tactic that you use, delayed, is very helpful. And I'm sure you have taken stuff off your plate once you have added something or thought about something if you had just delayed buying it. The other thing that works very well is if you add it in your cart and then don't check out the cart. Keep it there for a couple of days and come back to it. I'm sure you'll make a different decision at that later point in time. Those are great ways to save money or to control your spending. Yeah. No, that definitely helps. I think those are great techniques. And just to add to that, something came to my mind was I saw a post. I'm not sure if it was X or Insta. There was a post about a apple which reflected how people show up on social media. And it showed an apple which was half eaten. But the point of view of taking that picture was to show the other half of the apple, which was complete. But it was showing that half empty side of things. I know it's a visual illustration and I'm probably not doing a great job explaining it to you, but you get the idea of people on social media are just showing the fancier side of things of their life, but they are hiding away facts that are true and don't really reflect the full picture. So people need to be mindful of what they see. I agree with that. I think financial worries and stress, if they are not there, they take a huge burden off your plate. I read a book, I think it was called Happy Money. And the writer talks about that we need to kind of be sure of or have a level of where our happiness with money would be. And people need to realize, I would highly recommend you read that book out too. Maybe I'll do a synopsis later on X sometime. So it teaches you of you understanding your lifestyle, having a limit, and be able to stay within those limits and be happy with them. Because there's no limit to having a financial goal. Right now, it could be $1 million. 5 years down the line, it could be $10 million. Or likewise, if you're spending on a car, you want to buy, your first car was a used car, your second car was a new Corolla, your third car was a BMW, and then you just keep on going, and then there is no limit to that spend. And you can buy a Porsche later on for $200,000-$300,000.
So on the investing category, shorting stocks exposes an investor to potentially unlimited downside risk. So most of us, just working professionals, we don't really have time or really the interest to be keeping tabs on this like a professional like yourself does. So when you have a client that comes to you and they've got this bright idea of, I think this XYZ company is going to tank, I want to short the stock, how do you talk somebody out of this strategy if you feel as a professional they don't know what they're doing?
Very few professionals can do shorting of stocks successfully. I think probably the famous ones that we typically hear about or talk about is Steve Eisen. I think he does short stocks. Michael Burry as well, the famous, I think, the 2008 crash. He did shorting stocks and made a lot of money from it. Doesn't mean you and I can do the same. Will we be right? Maybe one time? Yeah, maybe. But to predict that and to have the ability to withstand the market swings is not something I would recommend to anyone, because the exposure is very high. So let's say if you buy a stock for $100, what's the worst you're going to do? You're going to lose the $100. You're going to lose $100. But when you short a stock, your exposure is much, much higher. You could easily lose $1,000 if the stock does not decrease in price. It is a strategy I typically do not recommend the average investors to do or get into. If there are people who are still interested, you can do the same with options. At least there is some protection there, but you can still sell an option. So if you are into a trade that is going unfavorable, you can still get out and have some limited loss, call it, rather than just be stuck with it. It does help, but there is still a lot of exposure there. It is not something I would recommend.
Okay, let's talk more practically. Your top 5 exchange-traded funds to invest in include SPY, QQQ, SCHD, VT1, and VTV. Would you be able to explain your rationale on these, and how do these differ from a target date fund such as Fidelity 2055 or something similar? Yeah, just curious your opinion on that.
Yes, which is what covers very well because it represents the S&P 500, so the largest 500 stocks are captured in that. And then QQQ is the application of NASDAQ, so more tech-heavy focused companies are there. Now, there is some overlap in SPY and QQQ, but if you want to balance your portfolio with exposure to more on the technology side, you can have a portion of SPY as well as QQQ or go heavier on that side. Or vice versa, you can have a more SPY approach and have a little bit of QQQ to balance out the volatility in the fund or in your portfolio. VTI, on the other hand, is total international. So that this would cover funds not just within the US, but globally. So you get a bit of international exposure, which is always good to have to diversify your investment. VTV, on the other hand, that is a value play. Now, when I think I did this post, it was to give a more balanced approach. And it depends on a number of factors, like your age, your target goals, what you want to do with your portfolio, what stage of investment are you on, determine how much you want to invest in each of these funds. So this approach, and as you said, I'm going to come to the target date fund. This is more up to you to decide. It gives you a bit more control over your exposure to these industries or geographically speaking to different areas to help balance your portfolio. And as you age, I would typically recommend, so if someone here is listening who's in their 60s and 70s, to please not be very heavy on QQQ, because QQQ is more volatile than the other funds. So if you are banking in on your retirement on this, then please use SCHD, which is a more dividend-focused growth approach. Likewise, VTV is as well. So now, with the target dates fund, what I just described to you, the different characteristics of the ETF, that kind of takes care of itself. So one might think and be like, you know what, this might be a better approach and an easy approach. So if you do not have a financial advisor or an investment advisor, this might make sense because you don't have to do the balancing of your portfolio. The target date fund would take care of that. Now, there's a flip side to this. In order to do that, they're going to be charging more fees. So typically the ETFs that I mentioned, I think all of them are within 0.1 percentage. If not, most of them are like 0.4. I think if you replace SPY with VO, I think you will be, the bulk of your investment portfolio will be at that 0.04 percentage. The Fidelity one, I think, let's say if you say you want to target a retirement date from 30 years from now, that puts you at 2055. That fund would have an expense ratio of anywhere between 0.7 to 0.8%. So I know 0.6% might not sound huge, but over a 30, 40 year period, it becomes a lot. I think if my math is right, over maybe $1 million over 20 years or 30 years would be roughly about $100K more just in expense ratios. So that is the downside of the target date fund. But then you don't have to worry about moving the ETF or balancing your portfolio and so on.
Got it. So if you just, I have Fidelity, like it's not difficult to, you just go into the website and choose which fund you want. So there's 5 funds here. So why not just divide it by 5 and 1/5 of your total invest, just divide it up. I plan on being in equities. Most people in middle age are mostly in equities, right? So is there anything wrong with just dividing that by 5 and putting a little in each long term?
The 5 ETFs that you had mentioned. So yeah, that would be a good balanced approach to go with. If you are on the younger side, if you have a younger audience out there, then I would recommend being more on the QQQ than the others, because that way you are more primed for growth in the long run, and that would help your portfolio grow a lot more in the next 20 years. Yeah. The other point I forgot to mention with the Fidelity one is, so let's say if you are buying into this fund, I don't have the exact percentages, but I'm sure it's anywhere between 10 to 20% of that portfolio would right now be in bonds. And as you start aging, it will increase. And maybe when you are maybe 20 years from that target date of 2055 or 2054, it would go up to almost 40%. So you are limiting your upside potential very early, in my opinion, to a more conservative approach than a growth approach. Fidelity provides you exposure to be able to grow in SPY or QQQ, NASDAQ or S&P 500. But a portion, or I would say maybe 10 or 15, maybe it's 15 or 20% of your position is in bonds. So bonds over a long 20, 30 year period are not going to grow. They are there to limit your volatility in the portfolio. They will only return a couple of percentage points per year in dividends or interest. But if you want to have a more growth related portfolio, then the target date funds do not provide you with that, because it would limit your exposure to growth funds.
This ties in with another type of fund, or tax efficient fund, which would be the 529. So my question to you is, do you currently have kids or plan on having kids? And how important are 529s compared to 20 years ago? And does a college degree matter as much as it used to maybe in the 80s and 90s? Let's just start with they're interrelated, but yeah, so it's like, what's your take on that versus just how much does it really matter?
A college degree, I think education is very important in life and just in general. So I think getting educated is something that gives you the potential to be able to learn and grow in your future age. Without having that, for me, that's my point of view, you limit yourself to be able to learn. This applies to most people now. I have seen people who prefer learning on their self-pace and are able to grow even more going down that path. But I would say education is important. Now, as you might have already noticed, AI revolution has started. So there is a risk that AI would replace our jobs. And a lot of the tasks that you see doing, which are repetitive in nature, even in the accounting fields or audit fields, within the finance umbrella, have started to be challenged and replaced. You also hear about robo-advisors. So you don't need financial advisors. Your robo-advisors can do part of your balancing of a portfolio. So there is a risk out there. And in the future, let's see how AI evolves over the next 10, 20 years. But there's definitely risk out there because of that. I'm not sure if you start noticing it in your physician or side of things.
I think it's evolving. I can just speak to my industry as a surgical pathologist. We're light years away from that, but I think a lot of us younger folks that are early career, we're cheering this on. We just view it as a distinct skill set to train specific AI algorithms for specific clinical problems. So it could be like a GI biopsy, like stomach biopsies, hammering through 20 stomach biopsies and triaging them to the more critical ones based upon the endoscopic findings. So if they saw an ulcer in the stomach, that's more risky. There's a chance there's a cancer in the ulcer or a precancerous lesion. I mean, we're cheering this on, but I totally agree with you. It's just something just mentally we have to prepare ourselves for. And I don't know what the future is going to hold, and I don't think anyone does. But I think when the week after ChatGPT came out, I was, in a fit of satiric rage. I wrote the piece called "ChatGPT Performs Below the Knee Amputations," because I think there's, in the beginning, everyone's just got this unbridled, this wave of enthusiasm. It's like, oh yeah, you could train the robot to do anything. But then when you get down to where the rubber meets the road, it's just like, okay, no. It's very specific to the profession at hand or the task at hand. And then within those tasks, it's also who is the person training this thing? Are they competent? Are they training this robot appropriately? It's like, dude, I'm sure you have gotten a newsletter at some point. Like I use a reading account where I just subscribe to newsletters. And some of these, I can tell who's using ChatGPT to write their newsletter, and they suck. And I just set up a rule, and I just auto-delete those ones so I don't even see them anymore. I give people a couple chances, but if I read through your thing and it just sounds boring and just lame, then I just... Either you're boring, that's fine. Then I don't want to jinx myself by accusing someone of being boring. Maybe they think I'm boring. So yeah, so at the end of the day, there's a human connection that we all need for reassurance and for accountability. And business is based on relationships. The surgeons that trust us to look at their specimens, they trust us because we answer our phones. And whenever there's a problem, we answer our phone, even on the weekend, and we address it, put our name on the line. I don't think human nature is going to fundamentally change. I think hopefully we, in our respective trades, will adapt and learn how to wield this to our advantage. to have more free time. Like, I would love to get rid of all the gallbladder specimens that are benign, that just eats up a lot of time, and spend more time at home.
I think one thing is for sure, in the next at least 5 to 10 years, workers or like physical work be very hard to replace with AI. Because I saw this, I think it was an advertisement or which said on a building the building was under construction, and it said, finish this building, ChatGPT. So ChatGPT cannot do that right now. Yeah, sorry. So to answer your 5 to 9s, so 5 to 9s are a great way. I would still recommend, if someone's out there and thinking about it, to invest in it. So it gives you a tax advantage, and you can then grow those contributions into your 5 to 9s tax-free, and later withdraw them to offset your education expenses. I don't see education getting any cheaper. Might as well save whatever you can to fund the 5 to 9s and invest and withdraw them later on tax-free. I think it's a great account to utilize.
There was a topic that came up called the buy now, pay later market, and it's valued at $17 billion as of 2023. I learned that from something that you had written back in December. 73% of users have an annual income of less than $75,000. Half of these users are ages 25 to 34 years. So my question is that, how do you talk your younger clients out of this buy now, pay later way of spending and way of living? And is this even sustainable? Are there going to be massive defaults in this industry?
Yes, they are. And I think roughly, maybe it was 37 or 38% of people have missed at least one payment. And I think maybe 75% people had a decrease in their credit score. So there is an impact on credit scores. I think people often forget that if I miss a payment on buy now, pay later, since I don't have any interest or anything of that sort, it's not going to impact my credit rating. But no, it does. It does impact your credit rating. It gets reported. So people, if someone's out there and thinking of going down this path, should keep that in mind. And recovering from a credit score decrease is not that. I think you have to be on payment then for at least a couple of years to start seeing a positive trend on your credit score, because this would stay. I don't recall exactly how long a missed payment on buy now, pay later would stay, but I would say somewhere between 3 to 5 years it will stay on your report. I think it matters because most people, especially the younger generation, I think, get influenced a lot by social media or by their circle. So they would get into these spending habits that don't necessarily are justified by their earning potential or their income. So they want to be mindful of that. And I like that quote, as you mentioned by name. He is right. Can you imagine your freedom? And I'm sure you are probably tied into some form of student debt. If you didn't have any student debt or mortgage or any credit card debt, how would you? Yeah, and I'll just carry on with what you were saying. People do need to enjoy life. So if you're just stuck in debt and constantly worrying about your next paycheck, I don't know how you're going to live or enjoy your life in your 20s or 30s. And as you mentioned, those student debts, for if someone's a doctor and has $300,000 to pay off on top of their car loan or finance lease, plus add in any travel expenses that they have gone through the buy now, pay later route. I don't know how you can come out of that, and it will set you back financially for a very long time. Doesn't matter if you start earning a whole lot of money towards the end of your career, but you would be set back by a lot. CPA is, I think, probably a field you can manage with once you start your audit career, or companies pay for it. You get support that way as well. They pay for your membership fees. But yes, the initial, once you're doing your bachelor's, is just the normal, whatever the normal education costs. So one point related to our discussion that I wanted to mention on the podcast, especially for those listening out and thinking whether they should be spending $10,000 or $20,000 in their education right now and are sitting around that 20 age bracket. I made up an example for them. Do you mind if I share it? So assume you are that person and thinking what to do. So you are at age 20 and you decide for the next 10 years, you're going to put $1,000 each month to an S&P index fund. So that roughly gives you about 10% in return. And if you are able to do it for 10 years, your total investment would be $120,000. Or because of compounding, or the effect of compounding, that would be about $200,000 by the age of 30. Now, if you don't put a single dollar in there for the next 30 years, so let's say you retire by 60 with no additional contributions, Chuck, do you want to guess how much you would be sitting at the age of 60? $3.6 million. The second person who says, I'm going to invest right now. I'm not going to invest right now. I'm going to use that money to enjoy life and travel around the world and buy the most expensive handbag out there. And by the age of 40, reality hits them. And if they start their journey at the age of 40, and they do so for 20 years till they're 60, same return situation, but now they have invested $240,000 in those 20 years. Their value of investments at the age of 60 would be $760,000. So that's almost a $2.8, $2.9 million difference, just because you put money towards investment first.
If you like this conversation, you can find JJ's Personal Finance Insight at JJ's Fin Club on X. You can also check out jjsfinclub.com/subscribe and check out his newsletter to better manage your debt, invest, and prepare for retirement. This is a concept that's particularly important to the working physician 5 years behind me. Once you enter private practice, your income is going to go from essentially nothing to about twice the median income, 2 to 3 times the median income of the United States. What you choose to do with that income is entirely up to you. But if you don't want to be a slave to the corporate healthcare systems, and you want to have the flexibility to live life on your own terms down the line, then you better get cracking on maximizing your existing investment accounts, such as your 401k, your Roth IRA, and also building a 6 to 12 month safety fund in case you need to pivot. Now, I've seen a lot of people make this mistake, especially people, I think, that grew up with resources and are used to a certain quality of life. Medicine is changing, okay? The glory days of the 1980s and 1990s where Medicare reimbursements were very high. The reality is that physicians didn't do a very good job of protecting the practice of medicine. So now we're seeing scope of practice creep. We're seeing declining reimbursements across the board. It doesn't really matter what specialty you're in. The only people that are somewhat protected from this are elective medical subspecialties such as derm and plastic surgery, fields such as that, or even private practice. I guess there's cash pay psychiatry. There's also cash pay family medicine. But in any case, whether it's cash pay or you work for a health system, you're still making good money. But you want to optimize your finances so that you don't have to worry about them. Get into the right habits, join communities like the one that JJ runs and some of the past guests on the podcast. Use these communities to discuss common financial issues that people run into, and then don't be the person that makes those mistakes. I once heard a story of a physician who had been contributing to his 401k for 30 years, but he was putting the money entirely into cash. And so he didn't understand the concept that it's just an account and you have to manage that account. Or if you don't want to manage it, you have to pay someone else to manage it. But you're better off just managing it yourself, because the 5 funds that JJ mentioned in this podcast are pretty much all you need to do. And you can balance that yourself with a click of a mouse and a few emails to your accountant. Don't be that guy that leaves 30 years of earnings in cash instead of in the S&P 500 or whatever index fund mishmash choose. So if you like this podcast, check us out at 3deepercuts.substack.com. I'm not going to ping you all the time. It's about once a week, once every 2 weeks, depending on how busy things are in the foggy trenches of medicine. If you do want to get spammed, and if you do want to get sold things, then subscribe to my other list, chuckgmd.substack.com. You can also put your email address at 3deepercuts.net, and I'll add you to the various offers that I have cooking, and some fiction work and some poems that I'm working on at rawcuts.substack.com. As always, I welcome your feedback. I want to make this the best listening experience possible for the working pathologist sitting at their microscope deep in the trenches of medicine, because this is about you. I want to make physicians better operators, better workers, happier, more successful, more free to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Thank you for supporting the podcast, and we'll see you on the next episode.